Jonathan Chick back with you with another episode of Shtisel Man. We are on the final episode of season one, episode 12. And we are having sort of a two-part discussion here connected regarding the Gitty Lippe dynamic, the relationship. But to understand that dynamic and how Lippe reacts to Gitty's sort of demands, and we need to understand the concept of full-time Torah study and the obligation to do so. And then we can go back to the Lippe Gitty dynamic and discover or uncover what really was cooking there. And also this builds up on our previous episodes of sort of the aftermath and why Lippe left Argentina, and perhaps we can see and look at a much more favorable light of Lippe's plight, because certainly in Argentina he was unmoored, isolated, lonely, and perhaps, although we don't want to point fingers, but perhaps it was Gitty's sort of way she dealt with Lippe, and there are many of you who've commented on this point, that led him to do the things he did. Now, of course, everyone is responsible for their own actions. At the same time, that husband-wife dynamic in Judaism is so important in all life. But we have to start with understanding the following. In the scene towards the beginning of the episode, we see that Lippe and Gitty have a discussion, and Lippe wants to leave the yeshiva, leave the Torah study hall, and enter regular business. And Lippe buys a cell phone and this and that, and Gitty says, "Oh, you're on the internet, and why'd you buy the phone?" and this and that. And Lippe's sort of saying, "I want to make a living for this family, and I'm not really into the learning and full time." And she says, "I want you to learn in yeshiva, period." Okay. All right. Before we get to who was right, wrong, or indifferent here, let's discuss this concept of full-time Torah study. Now, a lot of you since the beginning of Shtisel Man have asked about this, so let me dive into that for a bit. And it also helps us understand this conversation. Number one, learning Torah full-time. Where does this come from? What's this all about? So, if you go back in Jewish history, there was a tribe by one of the 12 tribes was Issachar, or Yisachar in Hebrew. Issachar, if you're a fan of the Joseph and Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat way of pronouncing the tribes, it's Issachar, right? Okay. Now Issachar or Yisachar studied Torah full-time. And there's no question and their partner Zevulun was out in making a living, and the two of them sort of had a partnership, Zebulun and Issachar, and they basically had a partnership that Issachar would learn all day, and Zebulun would make money and be able to support Issachar's learning. 12 tribes, 12 divided to 100 is around 8%, right? So that would tend to explain, or tend to translate, if you will, that 8% of the Jewish people studied full-time. So there's no question. We say Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. The study of Torah is greater than all. It's equivalent to all mitzvot. It is incredibly important. And it's incredibly important that everybody studies, at least on a daily basis, even if it means 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening, preferably more, but to study the Torah, because that's our connection to how we live our lives as Jews, if you will, in the traditional sense. But the notion of full-time study is really relatively new in the sense for when it's in a global way, where more than 8%, more than 10%, 15% even. But the push in the Haredi world, where everybody or most should sit and learn even beyond their marriage, beyond their years when they're young, into when they have children and have a responsibility of the family, it becomes complicated. And a lot of people have asked, well, how do they do that? How do they learn full time? The answer is they're dirt poor. That's the answer. So now, I don't want to be misquoted or something to that effect. So I want to make it very clear. I am very pro the study of Torah. Okay, what I'm not in favor of, and what I think I'm reflecting in the Shtisel episode, is to force those who are not cut out for it to study full time. And there's the problem, because if you're in the Beit Midrash, if you're in the study hall, and all you're doing is wasting time, you're going to feel a lot worse about yourself than if you would be out there making a living and doing something, even using your hands. There's some people like Akiva, his artistry, others with just being a plumber or just doing a healthy profession. Instead, what we have, though, we have the push because of stigma, because of community pressure or whatnot, and even because of post-Holocaust desire to bring the Torah back to its sort of place in the Jewish community. Because if you think about it, post the Holocaust, there are a lot of people who said that Orthodoxy is dead. But there was a big push that we should continue the Orthodox tradition, which is the traditional Jewish way, and through Torah study. And that was wildly successful and is wildly successful. But there is a downside to everything. And here, the extreme push that everyone should study Torah could end up biting people. And this is not a sort of intentional, but this is what's happened. And Lippe and Gitty is a great example of this. Here you have a couple, a Haredi couple. She has the ideal and sees the ideal of her husband should study Torah full time for ad infinitum. And there are those who study for full time for their whole life. And that's terrific. Those who are part of the 10%, those who are part of the ones who are the masters and the true Talmidei Chachamim, the great scholars and the leaders of the Jewish people in a religious sense, those should most definitely study Torah full time. But that's a percentage. The rest should continue Torah study to whatever degree they are able to, at least morning and evening and whatnot. But they need to go out and make a living in whatever. And there are different ways. There are ways in Jewish education, as we saw in Shtisel, and there are ways that continue to connect you to Jewish life, if you will, even by being a mashgiach or a shochet, a ritual slaughterer, or a kosher supervisor or whatnot. And there are ways in the regular world, if you will, which are, the usual things that people do to make a living. Lippe wants to get out and do that. And Lippe is not cut out. He does not have what we call in Yiddish the Sitzfleisch, the seat to the pants mentality to be able to sit and study full time. So he really does need, and we really sympathize with Lippe finally when this sort of story arc comes to the end in season 12, in 1, episode 12. And we see he's so frustrated because he's been learning or not learning in the study hall for all these years, feeling more and more depressed and frustrated and alone, and feeling like he's not living up to what his wife expects him to be, and he's not that. Yes, a religious individual. Yes, someone who is a family man. Yes, someone who studies and prays and does the ritual mitzvot and whatnot. Yes, all yes. But to study full time, while it's an incredibly honorable and wonderful thing, is meant for a small percentage of the Jewish people. And I'm talking about not a year after marriage, like spending a year or two in Kollel study. I'm talking about when you're married already with a bunch of kids, only then a percentage. And those people traditionally were supported by the community. But the community cannot support those type of overwhelming numbers. And in the end, you get the poverty that we see, even though there are many people that really are appropriate for this livelihood, but it is a percentage. So Lippe and Gitty get into this argument, and at the end of the day, Lippe still feels guilty, still feels like a failure. You could see it gnawing at him. You could see that Gitty's displeasure. And that is an incredibly difficult thing for a man, any man, to take. The feeling that your wife really doesn't have your back, the feeling that your wife thinks you're a failure. And again, this is a fictional series, but it mirrors life, and we see a lot of deep truths in Shtisel. And we see here that a lot of Lippe's struggle may indeed come from Gitty's way of, or high expectations that are really not realistic and not fitting the personality and the sort of arc of Lippe's life. I would argue that if Lippe would, and again, he does go into business in the future, but if Lippe would get the support of Gitty in going out there, fine, you need to get a cell phone, get one with a filter, you need to be on the internet, etc. Fine, you keep your study, your Torah study and all that. Again, there's a fear from Gitty and from a lot of people that if they go off, leave the Torah study hall, they'll leave Judaism and go off and who knows what. But if you do it in an appropriate manner and you keep your footing and you keep your connection through the various ways we do in Jewish tradition, then the fear really shouldn't be one that completely stifles a person's potential for activities in many, many different areas. I would have to give the example of from Dead Poets Society, those of you familiar with that movie, when towards the end, a father comes and tells one of the students, he says, you're going to Harvard and you're going to be a doctor. And he wanted to be a thespian. He wanted to be a actor. And he couldn't deal with that sort of conundrum, and to very, very tragic results. So, although I'm not equating Gitty's actions to that father in Dead Poets Society, I do see some echoes and some mirroring of not allowing the individual to be an individual and to be one who is successful with the support of their most loved individual in life. Now, I'm not saying she should support him if he goes and he starts, clowning around and messing around and living a hedonistic lifestyle or whatnot. Not at all. But if he's trying to really, really make himself into the individual he wants to be, a provider for his family, still studying and still a part of the religious or traditional community in this case, then I think that if we truly analyze this, we can see why Lippe felt so isolated and so down and so unmoored that might have led him in the first place when he went to Argentina to feel so scattered and so down. As this story continues and finishes its arc, and we finish season 12, I thank you for being a part of Shtisel Man, and I'm welcome to all your comments. As always, please subscribe. And also, we're going to start next time with season 2, episode 1. Thanks again. Take care.